Insight into the life and works of Aristotle.
Try for a moment to imagine a world before science, a dark, superstitious world where every natural event, from earthquakes and volcanoes to the tides and the movements of the stars themselves, was thought to be the work of invisible spirits, angry gods, endlessly fighting with one another. It was a world beyond understanding, until in ancient Greece, the touch paper was lit and everything changed.
Welcome to Great Scientists. Tonight I'm going to be talking to you about Aristotle. Aristotle was the first scientist. His ideas were to resonate down the next 2,000 years, and some of them are still with us today.
Nowadays, we rather take science for granted. But until 2,500 years ago, no one had ever considered that the world around us was worth studying. It was a world without biology, without chemistry, without physics. So imagine how revolutionary it was when it was suggested that nature was not governed by lots of strange spirits, but that it worked in a logical way, and that if we studied it, we might be able to discover what that logic was. As big ideas go, this is one of the biggest in the whole of human history. But why did it take the ancient Greeks to come up with it?
Because the Greeks were a dispersed island people, they had no centralized authority telling them what to think or how to behave.
So while the ancient Egyptians had pharaohs and high priests telling them what to think, the freedom-loving Greeks had philosophers arguing about the nature of the universe. And one of the greatest of all Greek philosophers was Aristotle.
So just what kind of a man was Aristotle? Although Aristotle left many writings, in truth, we know very little about his personality. However, we do have some rare archival footage of the time when he was a lad at Plato's academy.
Aristotle must have come from a wealthy background to be studying under Plato. However, little is known of his preschool education, although it seems safe to assume he was probably the class swot. By the time that he was an adult, he was apparently something of a dandy, wearing gold rings and having his hair cut fashionably short. But physically he wasn't up to much. With small eyes and spindly legs, he spoke with a lisp and is said to have suffered from poor digestion. Plato's academy was a private intellectual arena dedicated to hearty pursuits such as deep thinking and mathematical perfection. The focus was on the development of the whole man, the integration of intellect, sport, and fun. There were even Greek comedians. Plato's lessons could be sublimely intellectual. At other times, however, they were said to be downright outrageous, and Aristotle was the star pupil. Plato, perhaps a little jealous, nonetheless spoke of him as the intelligence of the academy. No matter, because in 347 Aristotle decided to leave town, quite possibly for political reasons. He sailed across the Aegean Sea to Atanius, where an old friend, the tyrannical ruler Hermias, provided him and his friends with everything they needed to contemplate the universe. He was to be away from Athens for the next 12 years. And so it was that Aristotle found himself far from Plato's academy, island hopping in the sunny Mediterranean with time on his hands, surrounded by nature.
Many of Aristotle's greatest achievements came from his profound understanding of how nature works. And it wasn't for nothing that he spent a lot of his time around a lagoon collecting specimens.
Unfortunately, I failed to catch any specimens of my own, so I decided to head into town and do a little shopping at the local fish market. Ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle weren't meant to be interested in fish. Back in Plato's academy, they were concerned with loftier things. They studied numbers and logic. They studied geometry and the mathematics of Pythagoras. But here was Aristotle getting his hands dirty with seafood, with real things, wondering if the rigorous logic he had learned from Plato could be applied to the natural world.
Aristotle was fascinated by what he saw as the structure and the function of an object. Why did a creature have features that were unique to its habitat? Why, for instance, did certain creatures like the squid have a hollow body and a delta-like tail and peculiar appendages, whereas other fishes were flat and seemed to move that way through the water? Some fishes had eyes on opposite sides of their heads, and beautiful scales, straight in one direction, yet somehow the scales jagged in the other, and wonderful fins, dorsal fins that come up, and side fins. And creatures like the eel seem to have a peculiar shaped head, eyes on either side of it, with absolutely formidable teeth. I wouldn't like to be nipped by this little brute in the water. Aristotle was fascinated by the way in which each creature seemed perfectly adapted to its environment. And let's not forget, these were only the creatures you could find around the Mediterranean, around the Greek islands. Goodness knows what there was in the rest of the great oceans of the world. Well, the reason why Aristotle was interested in you, my little aquatic beauty, is because you have hundreds and hundreds of different cousins and relatives. Are you really a fish at all? Are you a snake in the water? And what are these peculiar appendages? What do they do? How on earth can all of this diversity be comprehended? This sheer
And so, for the first time, the natural world began to be documented and classified. This was the start of natural science.
There's one way, though, in which Aristotle differed from scientists of the 17th century onwards. He didn't have an instrumental approach to science. Modern science is based on taking things to pieces, having tools which sharpen and refine our senses. We call them scientific instruments, microscopes, telescopes, balances, things of this sort. Aristotle had none of those. As far as we're aware, he didn't even have the simple magnifying glass.
This meant, therefore, that his approach to nature was entirely observational. And Aristotle didn't perform experiments. He merely observed natural objects in great detail and compared and contrasted what he saw. But his observations of the myriad creatures he found, nevertheless, laid the foundations for the modern sciences of biology and zoology. Of all Aristotle's writings, then, it is arguably the history of animals which has been the most influential. In it, he writes about sheep, goats, camels, horses, pigs, tigers, elephants, mice, donkeys, hyenas, swallows, eagles, sparrows, blackbirds, woodpeckers and crows. Then there's the sea life, including fish, crustacea and all manner of shell creatures. He covers tortoises, toads, snakes, crocodiles, moths and whales. Indeed, there's just about every creature you can think of, from human beings to head lice. In the process of working out why some creatures have fins and others wings, Aristotle had stumbled upon an important truth. The characteristics of these various creatures are not merely accidental or ornamental. They each have some purpose.
And because Aristotle saw everything in terms of purpose, he began to ask questions about the nature of the world around him.
Aristotle was looking at nature in a way that no one had ever seen it before. Why, for example, does a beetle have a hard shell? Why do sheep have thick coats? Why are flowers so brightly coloured? And just as fishermen have oars, Aristotle saw that ducks have webbed feet. Why? Aristotle would probably have said so that they can swim, which seemed to him to be the very essence of duckness, although this didn't explain why they were always trying to get into the house. Aristotle had begun to realize that there was a logic underpinning the whole of the natural world. Not just fish and plants and animals, but other natural phenomena like fire and water and the stars. And to these he now turned his attention. Aristotle realized that there must be a reason why everything is as it is. And what's more, there must be a reason why everything doesn't stay as it is.
Aristotle was the first scientist to think of nature as one unified whole, but he still had an important problem to solve. Why do things change? Aristotle realized that the forces of nature are logical, but he had one great question yet to answer. Why do things change? Allow me, if I may, to elucidate.
Aristotle's predecessors had been puzzled by the phenomenon of change. Heraclitus thought it perpetual and essential. Parmenides denied the very possibility of it, while Plato argued the ordinary changing world could not be the subject of scientific knowledge.
Everyone knows that things change. But why? Why don't they stay as they are?
Aristotle's answer to this question was elementary.
Welcome to the laboratory. Today, I'm going to be looking at Aristotle's doctrine of the four elements. Now, Aristotle believed that everything in nature was made up of the intermixing of four vital principles, which you could see in substances around you. And the way in which they combined produced everything from wood to stone to flesh. But exactly what were these four elements, and how did they combine? Earth, water, air, fire, and each of these elements had its own natural place. Objects made of earth will fall to earth. And water tends downwards and sits upon the earth. And when air is trapped within earth, it wants to escape. Let's give it the opportunity. And Aristotle believed that the element fire was present in all substances that were combustible. But you needed living fire to release the trapped fire. When we see the process of change taking place, we see the four elements interacting. Now here, I've got a piece of wood. It's a mixture of earth, air, fire and water. And let's see what happens when that wood begins to burn. First of all, as the combustion proceeds, the fire escapes from the wood. Then after that, there'll be smoke. Aristotle would say this was the air trapped in the wood being released by the fire. Thirdly, you'll be getting steam and grease and resins coming out. This will be the water trapped in the wood. And finally, when the whole process is over, you'll be left with an inert grey ash.
To us, Aristotle's ideas might sound absurd, but we must remember that this was the first time in history that anyone had posed the question of what things are made of and how they change.
Time now for another little movie.
Aristotle wrote a great many works, one of which was the Politics. It was in this masterwork, written when he was 37 years old, that he came to the remarkable conclusion that the optimum age for a man to marry was 37, and for a woman, just 18. Convinced of the brilliance of this insight, he promptly married Hermias' niece, Pythias, whom astute scholars have surmised was probably 18 at the time. It isn't recorded whether Aristotle revised his calculations in later life.
Hello?
By now, Aristotle had formulated his big ideas on the four elements and the nature of change in the world around him. It was time to turn his attention to bigger things. What, he wondered, were the laws that governed the heavens. Though Aristotle's theory of the cosmos was radical, it was nonetheless shaped by many peculiar ideas of his time.
Aristotle believed that right is better than left. Upper is better than lower. Front is better than back. He then tries to apply this principle to the whole universe.
The Greeks believed that the circle was a perfect geometrical shape. The reason for this is that they saw it as a divine creation. And as God had made the cosmos, so it stood to reason that circles and spheres should underpin the entire construction of the universe. Now, Aristotle knew that the Earth was a sphere, and he believed that it was in the center of the universe, in exactly the same way that you could imagine the center of an onion surrounded by a series of transparent skins. And each of these skins would carry a planet, and they would rotate at different rates. But then surrounding the whole was a great black sphere that completely encapsulated the entire universe. And into its inner surface were hammered crystal nails, or fiery points of light. These were the stars. And this great sphere was thought to rotate around everything once every 24 hours.
Aristotle believed that in our world below the moon there were four elements of earth, water, air and fire, all at perpetual war with each other. He also believed that there was another element in the heavens, a fifth element. The four earthly elements were subject to change, but the fifth element, or quintessence, was perfect and eternal. But though the heavens were unchanging, Aristotle believed that they were also alive, for all five elements were underpinned by the same divine logic of creation, animated by the same divine spark.
The function of that which is most divine is to think and use its intellect. So we must therefore suppose that the stars must partake in action and in life. Indeed, we must think that the actions of the stars are just like those of animals and plants.
The fifth element completes Aristotle's theory of everything. It was a brave attempt and hugely influential in Western thinking, but ultimately wrong. Nevertheless, Aristotle can claim to be the first person to recognize that the universe works in a rational way, and this was a revolutionary step forward.
Let's watch a little more cinefilm, shall we?
Aristotle finally returned to Athens in 335 BC at the ripe old age of 50. It was then that he founded his legendary Lyceum. He and his followers came to be known as the Peripatetics, the ones who wander, as they were always walking and talking. Aristotle is said to have been a lucid and persuasive speaker with a caustic wit, although it often seemed to his students that he was making everything up as he went along. The legacy of the Lyceum, however, remains with us even to this day. Finally, Aristotle was forced once again to leave Athens, fearing he might suffer the same fate as Socrates and be accused of impiety. And so it was that he left for Chalcis, where he lived out his days. He died in 322 BC, aged 63, apparently of a stomach complaint. There is, however, an alternative story. The sea channel between the island of Euboea and the mainland is very narrow, and the current mysteriously changes direction up to 5 times a day. It's speculated that Aristotle died of frustration, trying to fathom the reasons why.
Aristotle didn't just study science in the way that we think of it today. The whole realm of learning was his remit. Politics, philosophy, psychology, the nature of animals, the nature of man, ethics, and he even coined the term meteorology for the study of the weather. And as it's beginning to rain, I will see you later. Aristotle was, in so many ways, the first scientist. He was the first person to realize that a common logic runs through the whole of nature. And more importantly, he realized that that logic could be comprehended by the human intellect. Without this insight, science would not have come into being.
It was at the Leaning Tower of Pisa that Galileo set out to prove, for all time, that Aristotle knew nothing about the nature of balls.
A free case set of information cards is available to accompany this series. To order yours, please call our order line on 0870 555 5055 or log on to 5.tv/factsheets.